Good morning. I have so many people to thank straight off the bat. I want to thank Andy for that beautiful rendition, and we haven't met yet, but I love the work you do, so thank you. I'm so glad Ashley is here. I was hoping to get a chance to meet her, maybe talk a little bit after. Jean, and it has been a team effort, and I will say the organization, the communication that Jean has led has been very, very impressive in my experience. So thank you. Thank you to the committee. I want to name the committee. They stood, and I'm glad you asked for that because I thought I might, but you don't have to stand again. Gertrude, Clint, Judy, Janet, Kevin, Dorothy, Chris, and Nancy. I also want to thank Ron and Heather for also accompanying me during this weekend here. So thank you. We have some powerful words to root our time together this morning from Thomas Kelly. From his book, Well Worn in My Case, A Testament of Devotion, and from the chapter entitled The Eternal Now and Social Concern. And then comes a sense of presence. Do you sense that this is in the middle of something? There's a lot of good words here. I had to pick a few. And then comes the sense of presence, capital P. The eternal now breaks through the time nows and all is secure. A sense of absolute security and assurance of being linked with an overcoming power replaces the old anxiety. It is a security regarding the individual and regarding the group and regarding the race. And then we say, how could we have been so blind? For surely all things of value are most certainly made secure through him. For the experience of presence is the experience of peace. And the experience of peace is the experience not of inaction, but of power. And the experience of power is the experience of pursuing love, capital L, that loves its way untiringly to victory. He who knows the presence knows peace, and he who knows peace knows power, and walks in complete faith that the objective power and love which has overtaken him will overcome the world. And an immediate corollary to this is the weakening of the merely calculated, rationally planned decisions. When we lived in the one-dimensional time ribbon, we had to think life out all by ourselves. The past had to be read cautiously. The future had to be planned with care. Nothing was to be undertaken unless the calculations showed that success was to be expected. No blind living, no marching boldly into the dark, no noble but ungrounded ventures of faith. We must be rational, sensible, intelligent, shrewd. He's talking to himself here. But then comes the reality of the presence, and the now eternal is found to underlie and generate all time. And a life of amazing, victorious faith living sets in, not with rattle and clatter of hammers, not with strained eyebrows and tense muscles, but in peace and power and confidence. Thus, in faith, we go forward with breathtaking boldness, and in faith, we stand still, unshaken, with amazing confidence. For the time nows are rooted in the eternal now, which is a steadfast presence, an infinite ocean of light and love, which is flowing over the ocean of darkness and death. When you start naming names, you inevitably forget some. So I want to make sure that I also thank Tim, who joined us yesterday for a little bit. And I also so appreciate bringing Keith Esch into this moment. Some of you knew him, and he was my dad. I also want to mention Ginny Esch, who was my mom. And the two of them were a team. And I just want to make sure that we name her in this space as well. She loved this place and loved these people. And she loved me. In July of 1624, yes, 1624, 400 years ago, George Fox was born in an area of England many of us call Quaker country. I was there a year ago on a pilgrimage with a group of folks who climbed Pendle Hill together, where George Fox saw a vision of a great people to be gathered, which led directly to the founding of the Religious Society of Friends. He was 23 years old. He was 23 years old. Come on. I know that some of you have been on this pilgrimage. I know some of you have led this pilgrimage. When I was there, I visited places I'm sure you went to, places deeply rooted in History for Friends. Meeting houses, Lancaster Prison, Furbank Fell, Swarthmore Hall, all dating back to the mid-1600s. And I was excited. I was enlivened in these places. I could feel the incredible love and fearlessness of that time during which early friends faced arrest and persecution for their plainly stated beliefs and actions in the world. Quaker history in this corner of the world, right where we sit, is robust and deeply rooted as well. Only 100 years after its beginning in England, Quakerism came right here to North Carolina and took hold, as evidenced by the sacred ground of your cemetery, the murals outside your meeting house door, the Underground Railroad tree, which I have visited twice in my 2 days here, and Guilford itself, founded as New Garden Boarding School in 1837. All of these places are reminders, visible reminders, of Friends' valiant lives rooted in faith and action, the reality of the capital P presence. I'm excited again, enlivened again by the ancestors who gather here and by you. Greensboro hosts a spectrum of friends, unprogrammed, programmed, semi-programmed. Very similar to Richmond, Indiana, where I grew up at West Richmond Friends Meeting, a semi-programmed meeting, like New Garden, and also in close proximity to a Quaker college. In fact, Quakers from here emigrated there in the 1800s. Levi Coffin wrote that his family took the shortest route, the Conemaugh Road, and they arrived at their destination in 4 weeks. Many of us have traveled that road, and I did. This time, I reversed their path, coming from Richmond to Greensboro to attend Guilford College. We did not take the Conemaugh Road. We drove down the West Virginia Turnpike. And back then, it took about 9 hours. We took 2 days, which was an incredibly leisurely pace for us. As those of you who knew my parents and know me, no, that was slow. Probably due to the enormity of the threshold we were about to cross. According to Merriam-Webster, a threshold is the plank, stone, or piece of timber that lies under a door. Or secondarily, end, boundary, or the place or point of entering or beginning, the outset. So, a threshold is a point of ending or beginning, or of course both. It is the perfect place to remember the eternal now that Thomas Kelly so powerfully describes to us in A Testament of Devotion. In her book, The Wisdom Way of Knowing, Cynthia Bourgeault says that when we are faced with outer threats and opportunities, inwardly we will either brace, harden, resist, or we will soften, open and yield, fall through fear. Fall through fear into love. Building on these insights, and by way of giving you a sense of my path to this moment, I want to share 3 stories, really vignettes, don't worry, too long, about thresholds, crossing into the unknown, something new, something next, and think with you about choosing to do so softly, with an open heart, falling into and through any fear, and subsequently into love and action. This threshold we were crossing into North Carolina, into Greensboro in 1979, occurred in a Delta 88 Olds. That's Oldsmobile. Both of my parents were avid drivers, but I think Dad drove the whole way from Richmond. I was in the middle of the front seat with my mom to my right. The expansive back seat had been removed so that all my stuff would fit. Although I had traveled to this area before, in fact, just a year and a half before with my high school youth group, led by Max and Jane Carter, that was in a big bus full of kids, and I didn't notice some things on that trip that I noticed on this trip. And I noticed on this trip, crossing this threshold, the red clay soil. I remember the smell of the boxwoods on campus. And I remember the light and the heat. I remember being nervous, but not scared. I was crossing a threshold. There was mystery and intrigue, some risk, but mostly abundance. I felt no threat, so I wasn't inclined to brace myself. The seeds that had been planted in me among friends in Richmond bore fruit here. I was a child who was raised to feel that I belonged. So lucky. And during my years at Guilford, that sense of belonging deepened and widened through accompaniment by people like Dave and Jean, Bev and Bill, Judy and Cyril, and my religious studies professors, and you, literally you, or the people who were sitting in the chairs in your meeting room at the time. As participants in the youth group, hosted by the Bills, we were invited to offer prepared messages to New Garden Friends meeting. And I jumped at the chance. Apparently, I felt I had something to say. I also worked with mentors to organize the Quaker Concerns group on campus, et cetera, et cetera. When I remember that child, that young woman, I see fearlessness, faith with no doubt. About a decade later, I crossed the threshold into parenting in Boston as winter approached. Was I afraid? Yes, I was. It was dark. It was cold. My family and familiars were far away. But Larry and I were taught in our first birthing classes the mantra, the only way out is through. The only way out is through. Never truer. But I have used that mantra ever since. Giving birth and becoming a parent was, to that point, life's biggest lesson for me in moving through fear. Maybe not so much falling through it as pushing through it. Adding Cynthia's pushing through fear into love is exactly right. Moving into a new identity, a role that asked me to develop new skills and deeper compassion, required lots of practice and didn't have much sleep. To navigate the need to be stronger and softer was a new and extremely challenging puzzle. Crossing this threshold left behind the simple, fearless faith of childhood and presented more complications through responsibility, through life. Faith tempered by real questions, some disorientation, and a lot of casting around for a sense of community and belonging. Finally, a couple of decades after that, I crossed a threshold back into North Carolina as head of school at Friends School of Wilmington. This threshold allowed for exploration and some really buoyant creativity. In some ways, it was similar to moving to North Carolina the first time. But this time, the experience was informed by loss, and by grief. I crossed that threshold into the unknown with a much more seasoned leap of faith and a new experiential understanding of darkness. I trusted that the abundance of light in Wilmington, in the human and the more than human world, would flow over the darkness. Crossing that threshold meant having the opportunity to use a growing capacity to listen more deeply to the concerns, the fears, the anxieties in the community. During those years, we encountered the destruction of Hurricane Florence, the beginning of the pandemic, and the death of George Floyd in quick succession. In Wilmington, North Carolina, where racial justice issues simmered just under the surface, this series of events broke open the wounds of long injustice. And more than ever, the Friends School needed to be a very visible, immutable place of safety, inclusion, and belonging, which in itself brought us some risk, with which I know you are familiar. Open arms and trust may be natural stances of youth. As we grow older, with more experience and opinions, responsibilities, injuries of all kinds, and personal encounters with grief and loss, arms may fold closed, or in my case, a lot of time with hands on hips. If you know me, you've seen me stand like this, as I think and wonder about what's next. There may be, quote, rattle and clatter with hammers, strained eyebrows and tense muscles, relying on intellect a bit more and on spirit and movement a bit less. But now, with a faith seasoned by loss and grief and a pretty well-threshed life, the ocean of light showed its power and capital P presence. I am again on a threshold, noticing with some wonder what might be possible, rediscovering the power and the peace of the eternal now. How about you? this is a time of thresholds. Our country is on a threshold, our cities, our world, our families. And New Garden Friends meeting, you are on a threshold. Not just selecting your next settled pastoral minister, but building on your legacy and envisioning the community you want to be and how you may participate within that community to embody your purpose right now and tomorrow. And you have the tools of discernment and the practice of action that took the shape of Quakerism almost 400 years ago. In To Bless the Space Between Us, a book of blessings, John O'Donohue says, "We have fallen out of belonging. Consequently, when we stand before crucial thresholds in our lives, we have no rituals to protect, encourage, and guide us as we cross over into the unknown. But, and I don't say but to John O'Donohue very often, but I wonder if there is an extraordinary gift among friends. The DNA, the understanding of the role of deep listening for the presence and the eternal now, that allows for open-heartedness and connection, a true sense of belonging, breathtaking boldness and amazing confidence, a willingness to yield and fall into fear, and practices of spirit-led discernment that protect, encourage, and guide us as we come to the threshold and cross over into the unknown."